At the time of recording, it is the 26th of September, and we've had another update release with a handful of changes here. The one I will probably spend the most time talking about in this video will be Cassana's weapon, and going into exactly how ridiculous it is and likely meta-changing it's going to be. Obviously that won't affect most players though, so there's a lot of stuff which will be relevant to everyone in here. So we have an insurance function being added to Day of Trade. There are a lot of complaints of Day of Trade not being worth it for players because they'd spend a lot of diamonds re-rolling the carriages for what they wanted, and then they'd send them out and they'd just get plundered immediately. And it would be really frustrating for people, and they just sort of lost the motivation for the event. Now it reads like you can choose one item to make recoverable even if it is plundered. So if you have a weapon chest on your carriage, for example, you'll just ensure that, and maybe everything else gets taken, but you'll still have your weapon chest in the end. Then we have a handful of all-out war improvements going into the season. There are logistic rankings, so this reads like it will be a leaderboard for the whole battlefield and not just your faction. And it is offering, if we find it in here, gene weapon fragments. So another way to get these gene fragments. They're offering this everywhere at the moment. Mine is already 3 stars, so they're being very generous with this, making it quite easy to actually max out for purely free-to-play means. There are weapon fragments on offer all the way down to the 300th rank. So even if your role is as a source of support in All Out War, if you're not big enough to make as big of a difference in the fighting, but you still want to be active and help, you can now indirectly get account improvements through doing that as well. Other than that, we also have a automatic transport function. All Out War's warehouse is a new function called Transfer Supplies. The Lord Commander of the faction and the Lieutenants of the Alliance can select the resources to be transported and the target city. Once the selections are made, the system would automatically complete the transportation. This is a massive quality of life improvement because transporting was very annoying before. You got nothing for doing it and it was very, very time consuming. So this will make that a lot more convenient. This stuff you'll be able to claim even after the battlefield is closed and the healing time has been reduced in the hospital. I would assume this is partly because they've realised, at least on the top map, fighting normally just stops entirely after, say, a week. Either way, cheap for us is a good thing. A few more improvements for Day of Trade. Improve the rules of Day of Trade is very vague. I hope this will include stuff like making you lose a plunder attempt for failed plunders, so you can actually be rewarded for defending properly. If that is added, I would advise players, if you're frustrated with your stuff being plundered in the past, to just plunder yourself on an alt twice, if you can't ensure everything. But we'll have to see exactly what that consists of, some Wildling Siege, quality of life stuff, and a few more things there. Now, as I said at the start, the main thing here is going to be the release of Cassana's weapon. So the fact they've released Cassana's weapon first is probably quite deliberate to rebalance the meta of the game at the top end, since we have seen with the last batches of F5 commanders be released as Spear, then Inf, then Cav. I was the same through Dana, Dea, and Sinel, and Sarara, Vorian, Cassana, but now they're releasing the cavalry weapon first. You would assume this is because the top meta of the game is very dominated by the max infantry builds currently, so max accounts aren't needing to invest into other synergy types, so if they just make Cav overpowered, then it will rebalance things a bit. So I have everything about this listed out in Theory Crafting sheet here. The source of this is listed in the weapon tab as Treasure Hunt, so even if it isn't released the next Treasure Hunt and it's kept out like Amadon's weapon was for ages, it should be safe to start farming up those ancient crystals, since it should assumedly be released there. So what I have listed out here, I've just added on to the stuff I had written out for her on her normal release. So this is her base awakening effect. This is the base weapon, and this is the 4-star weapon here. We can't see the first, second, or third stars until the weapon is actually accessible and players can own it, but we can still draw conclusions out of it, obviously. So the stats and random attributes are the same limits as what we have currently. I did have some thoughts myself of maybe they'd raise the max base attack to 13 on these new F5's weapons, but no, it's still 12 as the limit. The minimum roll will be 4 base attack and it's troop locked, so it should be quite easy to get good rolls on this. The main improvements for it, if we look at it from the base awakening to 4-star weapon, is the cooldown reduction for active skills goes from 2 seconds to 3 seconds. The damage coefficient of the first active cast goes from 200% to 300%, and the damage reduction for each additional target hit is removed. That is very significant, and I'll probably write out in a notepad file exactly why, just to try and demonstrate how crazy this weapon is. And we also see here an additional effect added onto the weapon, so it's not just improving the existing skill, it's actually gaining an extra effect. You would assume that would probably happen with Vorian and Sorara's weapons as well. When allied female commanders have cast active army skills 40 times in total, they immediately cast active army skill 1 time on enemies in the front column, damage coefficient 300%. I don't know why this front column text is even there, because it hits in an AoE. I was wondering if they changed it, but even on its first release it was the same wording in the front column, and obviously if you look at reports, it hits here all 4 columns. So judging by that, we can probably assume that the second set of active triggers from Cassana will also hit in an AoE, since it's just the exact same wording as the first trigger. So there's a lot of stuff being buffed there. Interestingly, the progression of the weapon seems a bit different to other weapons we've seen before. So the base weapon itself is fairly underwhelming, actually. The only things that change is the damage coefficient increases by 30% on this first set of active triggers, and the damage on the second, third, and fourth rows isn't reduced as much. So there's not that much being changed there, and at 4 stars we see the extra second of cooldown reduction and this additional effect. So those two are the real eye-catching things, and they might come at, say, 3 stars and then 4 stars. Normally you see the base weapon get, say, the cooldown reduction, then the first, second, third stars get these damage number changes, and the final 4th star gets that other extra effect. Here it seems quite backloaded, so to get the most out of this weapon, you are going to have to invest into 2, 3, 4 stars in it. It won't be that great at base, so it'll be very, very high budget in that sense. The cooldown reduction is crazy. You see here, the active cooldowns of Layla, Cassana, Cersei, and Sinel go from 8 seconds to 7 seconds, and Daenerys' active cooldown goes from 5 seconds, which is already really low, to 4 seconds when you have 4-star Daenerys, 4-star Cassana, and 4-star weapon. So looking at that in practice, this is what I had written out for just Cassana's base awakening effect. So you gain an additional active cast on Layla, Cassana, Sinel, and Cersei, and you gain 2 additional active casts on Daenerys. The timings are fairly estimated, but they were correct on Cassana's initial release. Why the gap between the second and third actives is shorter than it should be when you read reports, I don't know. But you can see with Cassana's base awakening effect, you go from a total of 28 active casts, and then with the extra cooldown reduction from the 4-star weapon, that goes to 34. So you're gaining 2 active casts from Daenerys, one from Layla, one from Cassana, one from Sunel, one from Cersei. Then when you also add the extra cast from this, when you have 40 casts in total, which when you math it out, if you have 4-star Layla weapon, should be happening around the 24th second of a fight, so somewhere between 20 and 30 seconds, you should get this to trigger. Obviously, depending on your luck with the Layla reprocs, that can happen earlier, that can happen later. It will vary from fight to fight. When including that, you go to a total of 39 active casts, and then when including the Layla reprocs, you're gaining over 21 active casts per fight on average just from 4-starring this weapon alone, which is insanity really when you think of how many more wildfire procs you're going to be getting that, how many more wildfire disarms you're going to be getting from that, how many more Daenerys disarms you're going to be getting from that, how much quicker you're going to be stacking Sunel's passive, how much more you're going to be using the additional stacks on Sunel's passive. This will just send the damage you'll be dealing through commander damage through the roof, and this will be by far and away the best weapon ever released in the game to date. And Vorian and Sorara have a lot to live up to with their releases as well. And then, as I was alluding to earlier about writing this out, to sort of just put this into perspective of how good this is. So the way this reduction works in practice, if we look back here at the report analysis, so let's bring this up here. So the default commander damage coefficient is 260%. Then you have 20% from the Legion Dragon skill, and then there's 30% from the castle skins from the casino event, and there's now also 30% from the March skin from the casino event as well. So the current limit to your commander damage coefficient is 340% per cast. This 200% isn't about coefficient, it just directly multiplies this up. So here where Cassana's actives are hitting in an AoE, the first column is being hit for 200% of 340%, so 680% coefficient, and then it's 150% of that, then 100% of that, then 50% of that. The reason why both increasing this and removing that reduction is so crazy is because in that context here, the 340% would obviously be doing half of that to the fourth row, the bows, in the current state of the game. So 340 times 0.5 equals 170% commander coefficient damage to the fourth row. Now you're just going to be doing 300% by default to both the first, the second, the third, and the fourth row. So you're going from that 170% to what is now 340% times 3. So 1020% to fourth row in fights. And then you're also having this additional cast of that as well. So it's not just happening once, it's happening twice. So it actually goes to 2040% commander damage to the fourth row. So the AoE damage you're doing with the 4-star weapon compared to the current state of the game today where it's not accessible, if you're attacking someone's castle, for example, in this case it's being multiplied by 12. So some of the PvP reports we're going to see from cavalry whales soloing people's castles will be more destructive than anything we've ever seen before, because the AoE damage from this is just so stupid. There's nothing in the game which even remotely comes close to it. It's already ridiculous with all the wildfire procs. That alone will just decimate someone's wall defense anyway. And you can already see PvP reports out there from players with Cassana just easily zeroing people with very little losses. Now consider this fact where some of their AoE damage is being multiplied by like 10 times. It's just absolutely bonkers, to be honest. And the top meta of the game, unless I'm very, very wrong, is going to be very dominated by cavalry until there is a rebalancing with the release of Sorara, Vorian weapons, or new commanders. I mean, speaking from Vorian specifically, since that is the dominant build right now, the increase of disarms that are going to be coming from this, the damage output of that build will just be even further crippled, and at the same time of its own damage output being reduced, it's going to be taking so much more damage that I just don't see how any other build will really be able to compete with this. If it becomes super, super popular, then Baelish might become a lot more common than it is currently. But yeah, accounts with this weapon at 3 or 4 star are just going to be an absolute nightmare to be able to deal with. And honestly, I don't even know what they could do to Serara or Vorians to make it on par with this. For Vorian, I think you'd have to have a similar reduction to his bleed application, like there is with the cooldown reduction here. But then there's this additional effect being tacked on as well. The power creeping in general is just getting absolutely crazy with some of this stuff. But yeah, there we go. That is Cassana weapon and everything in this September update.